She was just trying to board her flight. A black nurse, tired after a double shift. But when the gate agent scanned her ticket, they froze, whispered, then called security. 10 minutes later, she was in handcuffs. No reason given. No explanation. Everyone filmed. No one helped. And then someone found out who the real passenger was supposed to be, and why they swapped her out. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The first snow of December drifted past the windows of Ashcroft Preparatory Academy, a private Massachusetts high school that looked more like a miniature Ivy League campus than a place for teenagers. Tall brick buildings, marble columns, and a courtyard littered with bronze plaques announcing the names of alumni who had gone on to Harvard, Yale, or Wall Street. Every corridor whispered the same message: we produce greatness. 17-year-old Micah Bell walked those corridors, like a shadow. He was tall and lean, always with his hoodie zipped up, always with a notebook in his hand. While the other students carried iPads and designer backpacks, Micah carried his father's old leather satchel, its strap cracked from years of use. He moved like someone who wanted to be invisible, yet his skin, dark and unbothered, made him stand out in classrooms full of pale faces. Teachers called him quiet, students called him weird. Some whispered another word when they thought he couldn't hear. Quota. Advanced calculus, room 304, was his one safe space, or so he'd thought. Math never laughed at him, never underestimated him. Numbers were numbers, proofs were proofs, but the humans around them were another story.
Mr. Harmon, the teacher, had a reputation for theatrics. A man in his mid-40s with sandy hair and an ironic smirk, he liked to call himself a disruptor in education. He'd tell parents at open houses that he challenged kids to think beyond the textbook. But his challenges didn't fall equally on all students. He joked with Reed Kavanaugh, the golden boy with a legacy spot at Princeton, or gave hints to Emily Watkins, whose father donated half the lab equipment. But with Micah, Harmon's challenges felt more like tests of worth.
That morning began with a debate. They were reviewing the concept of limits. But somehow, as often happened, the discussion turned to genius. Mr. Harmon asked who the class thought of when they heard the word genius. Einstein, Reed said without hesitation. Ramanujan, Emily added, trying to look cultured. Harmon nodded approvingly. Good. Anyone else? The silence thickened. Micah's pencil moved across his notebook as he quietly wrote, Katherine Johnson. He didn't raise his hand. He never did. But Harmon's eyes found him anyway. Micah, he said suddenly. Who do you think of when you hear genius? Micah paused. The room shifted toward him, 30 pairs of eyes waiting for the black kid to speak. He cleared his throat. My father, he said softly. A few kids snickered. Harmon's brow lifted. Your father? He was a math professor, Micah said. Was? Harmon interrupted. Not anymore. He was fired, Micah replied, keeping his voice even. False accusations. They ruined his career. The room went still. Harmon gave a tight smile. I see. Well, genius is rare. Hard to prove. Especially when it's just claims. Micah felt the sting but didn't answer. His father had been a brilliant mathematician, but the university had treated him like an intruder in his own lecture hall. A plagiarism charge, unfounded but persistent, had ended everything. Now he worked nights at a warehouse. Anyway, Harmon said brightly, turning to the board. Speaking of genius, he drew a long equation, symbols flowing across the green surface, like a foreign language. This, he declared, is an unsolved problem. Even the math team couldn't crack it. It's been on this board for a month. He spun around, marker in hand. Reed, want to take a shot? Reed laughed. No thanks, Mr. Harmon. I already embarrassed myself last week. Emily? She shook her head. I'm not even going to try. Harmon's eyes swept the room and landed on Micah. His lips curled. How about you, Micah? You seem confident when you talk about genius. Maybe you can show us what that looks like. A ripple of amusement ran through the class. They loved this game. Pick the quiet kid. See if he cracks. Micah's stomach tightened. He hated attention. He wanted to fade into the back wall. But Harmon wasn't done. Come on, Harmon coaxed. You're in advanced calculus, aren't you? If you're so smart, solve this. The one problem no one here ever could. He tapped the board, his smirk widening. Unless you're afraid. The laughter was softer this time, more like anticipation. Micah stared at the board. He recognized the equation instantly, not as an unsolved problem, but as a variation of one his father had taught him late at night at their kitchen table. The same symbols, but a different arrangement. His father had called it our little puzzle. Micah felt his chest rise and fall. The room seemed to shrink, the faces of his classmates blurring at the edges. All he saw was chalk on a green board. Inside his head, numbers aligned, patterns emerged. Not magic, not luck, just years of learning in secret. Long after his mother went to bed, his father whispering proofs, like bedtime stories. "Go on," Harmon said. "Show us." Micah stood slowly. Chairs creaked as students turned to watch. He could feel their eyes like heat on his skin. Someone whispered, "He's gonna blow it." He walked down the aisle, each step heavier than the last. His hands itched for the chalk, but his heart pounded with something heavier than nerves. Memory. He remembered his father's voice the night they finished the puzzle for the first time. "Never show them unless you're ready for them. Not to believe you." At the front, Harmon stepped aside, arms folded. "Let's see what you've got." Micah took the chalk. It was cold, brittle. His fingers trembled. He raised it to the board, then paused. The class was silent now, not mocking, not laughing, just watching. He thought about sitting back down, about letting them think he couldn't do it, about keeping his secrets safe. But then he thought about his father, about all the nights of equations, the unpaid bills, the way his mother's hands cracked from hospital sanitizer, about being called a quota kid, about never being seen, except as a stereotype. He gripped the chalk tighter. Harmon smirked. "Any day now." Micah exhaled slowly. The noise of the classroom faded. The sound of snow outside became clearer. Like static, he felt time stretch. And then, without looking back, he walked up to the board. The chalk touched the surface, and Micah drew his first line, not tentative, but precise. A movement so sure it made the entire class sit back in their seats, holding their breath. The chalk felt like ice in Micah's hand. The green board stretched in front of him like a battlefield, symbols scrawled across it like enemy lines. Behind him, 30 students shifted in their seats, trying to mask their excitement with smirks and half-hidden grins. They weren't expecting a solution. They were waiting for a spectacle, the quiet black kid finally stumbling under pressure. But Micah didn't stumble. He didn't even blink. His mind had already started slicing the problem into fragments the moment Harmon dared him. While his body stood still, his thoughts raced in quiet precision, the way his father had taught him. Start with what you know. Unravel what you don't. He scanned the equation again, his eyes darting across the variables. The problem wasn't unsolved, at least not to him. It was a variant of a proof his father had once scribbled on a torn envelope. After dinner, someday, his father had whispered, "Someone will ask you to show them this. Don't do it for them. Do it for you." He remembered that night vividly. The house had been dark, except for the kitchen light. His mother was at the hospital, working another double shift. His father sat across from him, eyes tired but alive with numbers. "They'll never believe a kid like you can do this," he'd say. "But you'll do it anyway, and you'll do it better than anyone." Now here he was. The kitchen was gone. The warmth of his father's voice was gone. Only the classroom remained, a gallery of skeptical faces. Someone whispered from the back, "This is gonna be good." Another snickered. "He's not even starting. He's frozen." Micah tightened his grip on the chalk. He breathed in through his nose, out through his mouth. The noise faded. The snow outside hissed faintly against the window. "Anytime, Belle," Harmon said, his voice cutting through the silence. "We're all waiting." Micah's eyes flicked to the teacher for a fraction of a second. Harmon was leaning back against his desk, arms crossed, his smirk still plastered on. It wasn't curiosity. It was challenge. It was the same smirk Micah had seen on men who asked his father where he really got his PhD. He turned back to the board. Without another word, he began to write. The first line came like breathing, then the next, then another. His wrist moved steadily, a rhythm building. Symbols bloomed under his hand like constellations. At first the class tittered, but as the lines multiplied, the sound shifted. Whispering turned into silence. Even Harmon straightened. Micah wasn't guessing. He wasn't fumbling. Each stroke of chalk landed with purpose. He heard a chair squeak behind him. Emily Watkins muttered under her breath, "Wait! Is he—" Reed, usually cocky, leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "No way," he whispered. Micah wrote faster. He had no plan to show off. He just wanted to finish before the fear caught up with him. His heart pounded against his ribs, but his mind stayed clear, breaking the problem into symmetrical patterns, converting it into something manageable. Harmon moved closer, peering at the board. His smirk faltered. That's not the approach, he began, but stopped.
Micah didn't respond. His father's voice echoed inside him. You don't owe them explanations.
A bead of sweat rolled down Micah's temple. His hoodie clung to his back. He could feel 30 pairs of eyes on him, each one recalculating who he was. He switched colors of chalk, moving from white to yellow, highlighting a key step. Then he boxed an expression, drew an arrow, and wrote a lemma that most undergraduates hadn't seen yet. The classroom shifted from casual amusement to something like awe. Emily's hand shot up, trembling. Mr. Harmon, what is he doing? Harmon didn't answer. He was staring at the board, as though it had betrayed him. Micah wrote another line, then another, connecting proofs like stepping stones. He could feel his father's pride in every stroke, but he also felt something else rising. Anger. Anger at years of being ignored. Anger at Harmon's dare. Anger at being invisible, until he became a spectacle. He didn't just solve the problem. He transformed it. He reframed the equation, introduced a theorem Harmon hadn't even taught yet, and began closing the loop. Students exchanged looks. Reed whispered, "That's a graduate-level trick." Emily muttered, "I've never seen Harmon look like that before." The air in the room thickened. Micah's hand flew faster. Chalk dust gathered on his fingers, his sleeve, his desk. He felt like he was running downhill and couldn't stop. But he didn't want to. And then, unexpectedly, Harmon spoke. His voice wasn't mocking anymore. It was tight, controlled. "Belle," he said slowly, "where did you learn that step?" Micah paused midline. He didn't turn around. "At home," he said simply. "At home?" Harmon repeated. "My father taught me." "You're saying you derived this on your own?" Micah's jaw clenched. Yeah. A ripple of unease passed through the class. The same words his father had heard years ago were now aimed at him. Not curiosity. Suspicion. "Interesting," Harmon said, "because that's not in any of our textbooks." Micah turned then, just enough to look at the teacher. "Maybe it should be," he said quietly, and turned back to the board. Gasps flickered around the room. Micah never talked back. He wrote faster now, finishing the final steps. The proof was nearly complete, but his heart was thundering. He knew how this would look. He'd seen it before. His father's office raided. His credentials doubted. His colleagues whispering, "Impossible," when what they meant was impossible for him. He boxed the final expression, circled it, underlined the answer. It glowed against the green board, like a quiet victory. The room stayed silent for a beat. 2 beats. 3. Then Harmon spoke, but not the way anyone expected. "Class dismissed," he said sharply. "We'll revisit this tomorrow." A low murmur rose from the students. It wasn't time for class to end. Harmon never ended class early. Micah lowered the chalk, his fingers trembling now that it was over. He turned to face them. Emily stared at him, wide-eyed. Reed's jaw hung open. Someone at the back lifted their phone and snapped a photo of the board. Micah walked back to his seat slowly. His legs felt heavy. His notebook slid off his desk onto the floor. He picked it up, and when he straightened, he caught Harmon watching him with an expression he couldn't read. Part disbelief, part calculation, part something darker. "Belle," Harmon said finally, his voice low. "Stay after class." The students exchanged looks. The bell hadn't rung, but they began gathering their things, whispering furiously. Micah sat back down, his hands clasped. He felt a tremor of dread. He had done exactly what Harmon dared him to do. And yet the man's eyes were not congratulatory. They were assessing, like a warden deciding what punishment fit the crime. Harmon turned to the board and wiped a small corner, smearing one of Micah's lines. "Where did you say your father taught you?" he asked again, more sharply this time. Micah met his eyes. "At home," he repeated. "I see." Harmon's gaze flicked to the clock. Class dismissed. Everyone out. Chairs screeched. Backpacks zipped. The students filed out, some glancing back at Micah with a new kind of curiosity. Reed muttered, "This is crazy." Emily whispered, "He actually did it." Micah sat frozen as the room emptied. The snow outside blurred the windows, the sky turning white. Harmon stayed by the board, his back to Micah. That was impressive, he said finally. His tone was flat, almost too impressive. Micah swallowed. You dared me. Yes? Harmon said softly. I did. He turned then, his face unreadable. And now I have to decide what to do about it. Micah blinked. What to do? You'll understand soon enough. Before Micah could answer, Harmon crossed to his desk, picked up a folder, and left the room without another word. Micah sat alone in the empty classroom, the board behind him covered in his work, the chalk still warm from his hand. The quiet pressed against his ears. He looked down at his fingers, streaked with dust. They were trembling. Outside in the hall, a low buzz rose. Students talking, phones pinging. Micah could sense something spreading already, faster than he could stop it. He turned toward the door just as his phone buzzed on his desk. A notification. Someone had already posted a video of his solution online, and it was climbing toward 1 million views. The notification on Micah's phone vibrated again, lighting up the desk in the dim classroom. He didn't dare look at it. Outside the door, voices swelled, students spilling gossip like water from a cracked dam. He could catch fragments through the thin walls. He actually solved it. I recorded the whole thing. Mr. Harmon's face though. He sat frozen, his fingers still dusted with chalk, his pulse hammering. For the first time in years, he wasn't invisible. But it wasn't the kind of attention he'd ever wanted. The door opened. Mr. Harmon returned, closing it behind him with a soft click. He didn't sit at his desk. He stood by the window, looking out at the falling snow. The silence between them stretched until it became almost unbearable. You realize, Harmon said finally, what you've done here. Micah kept his eyes on the board. I solved the problem you put up. Harmon's reflection in the window flickered. You didn't just solve it, Belle. You rewrote it. No student, no teacher in this school has ever done that. Micah turned slightly. Isn't that the point? To solve problems? Harmon pivoted, his smirk gone now, replaced by something taut and wary. The point, he said carefully, is to learn, not to humiliate your peers, not to... He stopped himself. Micah's eyes narrowed. I didn't humiliate anyone. You dared me. The teacher's jaw clenched. And yet, somehow, you had an answer. An answer to a question no one else could solve. Where did you really learn that? Micah's voice was quiet, but steady. At home. From my father. That's not good enough, Harmon said flatly. Micah blinked. Not good enough. Harmon crossed the room, leaning over the desk as if looming could make his point stronger. You expect me to believe that a 17-year-old, any 17-year-old, could solve an unsolved math problem? With no external help? Micah's stomach twisted. The accusation wasn't new. His father had heard it his entire career. You're too good, so you must be dishonest. But to hear it here, in a classroom where he'd done exactly what he was told to do, felt like a punch to the gut. I didn't cheat, Micah said, his voice firm. Harmon didn't respond. He picked up a piece of chalk from the tray and stared at it like it might explain everything. The door opened again. Emily peeked in. Mr. Harmon? The hallway's crazy people are posting videos. Everyone's saying, class is over, Harmon snapped. Go home. She flushed and withdrew, the door clicking shut. Micah stood, gathering his notebook. Am I done here? Harmon's eyes snapped to him. No. Sit. Micah hesitated, then sat slowly. The teacher's expression had shifted again, a calculation running behind his eyes. You're talented, Harmon said at last. But talent doesn't excuse dishonesty. Tomorrow morning, you'll meet with the Academic Integrity Committee. Micah's heart thudded. What? You heard me. We'll review your work. We'll determine how you arrived at your solution. Micah stared at him. You're accusing me of cheating? I'm saying, Harmon replied coolly, that something about this doesn't add up. And until I know what your status in this class is under review. It was almost surreal. Micah had done exactly what he was told. Solved a problem, and now he was facing punishment for it. You didn't question Reed when he got an answer wrong, Micah said quietly. Reed didn't present a graduate-level proof. Harmon shot back. Micah swallowed hard. No, he said. He just got it wrong. And you still called him brilliant. For the first time, Harmon's eyes flickered with something like discomfort. Go home, Belle. We'll talk tomorrow. Micah rose, his hands trembling but his back straight. He walked out of the classroom, the hallway buzzing with whispers and phones flashing. People looked at him differently now, not like a shadow, but like a headline. By the time he reached his locker, the video had already spread. Students were showing it to each other, their faces a mix of awe and disbelief. "That's him," someone whispered as he passed. "He must have memorized it or something." "No, dude, I saw it. He did it live." Micah shoved his books into his bag, his movements stiff. Every glance felt like a weight. He slipped out the side door into the falling snow, the cold air biting his skin. When he got home, the house smelled of disinfectant and coffee. His mother was still at work. His father's old satchel lay on the kitchen table, the leather worn but solid. He dropped his bag next to it and sat down, burying his face in his hands. His phone buzzed again. This time he looked. The video had 2 million views. Comments flooded in. "This kid is insane. Harvard better call him now." Proof black excellence exists in math. But mixed among them were darker ones. "No way he did that. Probably staged. Affirmative action strikes again." Micah stared at the screen until the words blurred. He heard the front door open. His mother, Nia, stepped in, her scrubs damp from the snow. "Micah," she called. "In here." She walked into the kitchen, her eyes immediately going to his face. "What happened?" He hesitated. "Nothing." She raised an eyebrow. "Your face says otherwise." Micah exhaled. "Mr. Harmon dared me to solve a problem. I did. Now he thinks I cheated." Nia froze. "He what?" "He's making me go before the academic committee tomorrow." Her jaw tightened. "Of course he is." Micah looked at her. "You're not surprised?" She set down her bag, her movements sharp. "I've seen this before, baby. They don't expect you to be brilliant. They expect you to be grateful. And when you're not, they look for a way to knock you down." He stared at the table. "I didn't even want to do it." "I know." She reached across and took his hand. "But you did. And you showed them who you are. That's why they're scared." His throat ached. "Dad said this would happen." "I know he did." Her voice softened. "But he also said you were ready." Micah nodded, swallowing hard. Maya squeezed his hand once, then released it. "We'll handle this. All right? You're not alone." He nodded again, but inside he felt a hollow dread. He knew how this story usually went. Upstairs, he opened his notebook, staring at the equations he'd scribbled weeks ago. Proof after proof, most of them far beyond anything Harmon had ever taught. He'd never shown them to anyone. Now, because of one dare, his secret was out, and being treated as a crime. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a direct message from an unknown account. "I know who you are. They won't let you in." Micah's stomach dropped. He typed back, "Who is this?" No reply. He stared at the screen, the snow outside falling harder now, muffling the street. Downstairs, the front door opened again. His father coming home from the warehouse, his boots leaving wet prints on the floor. Micah closed the notebook and shoved the phone in his pocket. He wasn't ready to tell him yet. "Micah," his father called. "You up?" "Yeah." "Come down a second." Micah descended the stairs, slowly. His father stood in the kitchen, still in his heavy coat. He looked tired but alert, his eyes flicking to his son's face. "Something happened at school?" Micah hesitated. "It's fine." His father's gaze sharpened. "No, it's not. Tell me." Micah drew in a breath. "They think I cheated. On a math problem." His father's jaw tightened. "Of course they do." Micah blinked. "You're not surprised either. I told you this would happen," his father said quietly. "They can't imagine you being smarter than their best. It threatens them." Micah stared at him. "What do I do?" His father took off his coat slowly, hung it on a chair. "You tell the truth. You show them your work. You keep your head high." Micah swallowed. "And if they don't believe me?" His father's eyes were steady. "Then you make them." Micah nodded, his chest tightening. Later that night, when the house was dark and quiet, he lay awake staring at the ceiling. His phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a DM. It was an email from the school. "Dear Micah," it read. "Effective immediately, you are suspended pending an academic dishonesty investigation. A hearing will be scheduled tomorrow at 9 a.m. Micah stared at the words until they blurred. His hand trembled as he set the phone down. In the dim light of his room, his phone buzzed once more. A second email, not from the school but from an unknown address. It contained a single line: "We're going to make sure you never step foot in that school again." Micah sat in a small windowless conference room off the school administration wing, his back pressed against a folding chair. His fingers hovered over the edge of the notebook in his lap, but he didn't open it. The walls were painted institutional beige, The only sound was the muffled conversation from the hallway and the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. He could feel the weight of that room pressing on him, as though suspicion itself had physical mass. Earlier that morning, Mr. Harmon had escorted him there with clipped formality. Students whispered in the corridors. Teachers avoided eye contact. Reed Kavanagh strolled past, head held high, as though nothing unusual were happening. Reed had tried the very same problem. He had stumbled, made errors, drawn blank after blank. No one suggested an investigation when Reed failed. But now, with Micah, excellence had become evidence of wrongdoing. A door clicked. The principal, Dr. Marissa Thorne, entered quietly, flanked by two stern-looking faculty, the dean of students and the head of academic integrity. Dr. Thorne was in her early 50s, her hair streaked with gray, and composed in a way that rarely betrayed emotion. But today, Micah thought, there was tension in her shoulders. "Micah Bell," Dr. Thorne began, voice steady. "We've called you here to respond to allegations of academic dishonesty." Micah's throat was dry. He cleared it softly. "I didn't cheat," he said. She nodded slowly. "That's what we intend to determine." She turned to the dean. "Please present the case." The dean, a loud-voiced man named Mr. Carlton Reeves, took out a stack of papers. "We have the submitted problem on the board. Mr. Bell's reproduced steps in your notebook, and archival photos of the board. We also have witness statements from students who say they saw him writing rapidly, apparently copying from a source." Micah glanced up. "From a source?" he said quietly. "Yes," Reeves said sharply. "A phone, a device, something. We don't know, but your work matches too closely to the board too quickly to be plausible." Micah's pulse thundered. "You're saying I copied from the board? I derived it." They exchanged glances. Dr. Thorne said, "We'll examine your drafts. Any scratch work, any drafts you have. If necessary, we'll bring in external reviewers." Micah swallowed. He had all those drafts scrawled in margins, on napkins in the margins of textbooks, in his own hidden notebook, but revealing them would expose everything. Late nights, hidden tutoring, years of secret progress. He looked up at Dr. Thorne. "Will Reed be subject to the same process?" Her face remained impassive. She paused, then said, "Reed's work is under review, but at this time no formal charges are being pursued." Micah felt bile rise. "So if a white student fails, no investigation. If a black student succeeds, you call it cheating." A hush filled the room. Reeves tightened his jaw. Dr. Thorne looked away, her lips pressed together. Then Nia Bell burst through the door, her white nurse's jacket dusted with snow, her face flushed with defiance. She stepped forward. "What is going on here?" she demanded. Reeves stiffened. "Mrs. Bell, this is a private meeting." She cut him off. "My son is being accused of something he did not do, and I demand an explanation." Dr. Thorne rose, arms raised to calm. "Mrs. Bell, we are simply following procedure." "But you don't follow procedure when Reed fails," Nia snapped, her voice trembling. "You don't call investigations then. You call them only when your narrative depends on suppressing black excellence." Micah's heart seized at her words. He'd rehearsed arguments, but hearing her speak them, fierce and full of pain, made the room tremble. Reeves opened his mouth, closed it. Dr. Thorne cleared her throat. "Mrs. Bell, please." She turned to her son. Her eyes were bright, wild. "Micah, you did nothing wrong. Nothing." Micah swallowed. "Thank you, Mom." Dr. Thorne looked between them, exhaling. "We will take your remarks into account, but the process proceeds." She tapped a stack of documents. "You are suspended, effective immediately, until the hearing. You may not enter any classrooms. You may not participate in classes, nor may you sit with peers or attend school functions until this is resolved." Micah's chest tightened. He looked at Nia, who squeezed his hand once before pulling it away. Dr. Thorne continued, "You may come to campus only for your hearing, accompanied by a guardian. You will have access to your personal files and may present evidence on your behalf." Outside this room, the world kept turning. Snow still fell outside. Cars still passed. Inside, Micah felt as though he'd been sealed inside a tomb. As he rose to leave, Reeves blocked his path. "One more thing," he said. "If we find evidence of dishonesty, your academic record will reflect a violation of integrity, which could affect your college applications." Micah's throat burned. He stared at Reeves, then at Dr. Thorne. She nodded curtly. He walked out. The world felt colder. Hallways were hushed. Students parted around him like a current. Phones were held up discreetly. Reed walked past with his friends, casting a sidelong glance at him, but saying nothing. In the parking lot, Micah got into his mother's car. Nia's hands trembled on the steering wheel. She didn't speak until they were pulling away. "Micah," she said finally, voice low, "don't back down. Show them your truth." He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. That night, the house was darker than before. The living room light stayed off. Outside, wind rattled the windows. Micah lay on the couch with his notebook open, drafts spilling, erasures visible, page after page of attempts. He felt exposed, vulnerable. He'd never shared these with anyone, not a soul. He tapped his phone. Social media was lighting up. But buried beneath supportive messages were others. "He's lying. Fake. This looks staged." That he plagiarized. In the quiet of that night, Micah's phone pinged. Another email from the school. Not the hearing notice yet, but a memo to parents indicating that an academic dishonesty case was under review. He closed his eyes. Fear twisted in his gut. Then an unexpected twist. A notification from his father's old university email account. The one deactivated years ago. Someone had sent it to him. Proofs archive.zip attached. You may find things interesting. Micah's pulse jumped. He opened the attachment. Inside, scanned files, annotated papers, some of them his father's past work, handwritten derivations, rare theorems, and in those derivations, Micah recognized patterns he had used. His father's past had come alive in pixels on his screen. And as he stared, his phone buzzed again, this time from the school's social media account. Micah Bell suspended for suspected academic dishonesty. Further investigation pending. Micah sat in darkness, stained with chalk residue, heart pounding. The school had not only silenced him, they were rewriting the story of who he was, before he even had a chance to speak. Across the city, a video went live. The footage from the classroom, with Micah's solution broken down, narrated by someone claiming it was a setup. The view count soared, and at the bottom, a single comment, "Let's rid this school of its fraud." At first, Micah didn't even realize the video had gone viral. He was too wrapped in his own quiet storm, the bruising suspension, the silence from teachers, the knife-edged stares in the hallway. But while Ashcroft tried to sweep him away behind closed doors, the internet cracked open the story. The video, grainy and shot from the back of the classroom, showed Micah's entire proof, beginning to end. You could see his hand moving with uncanny speed, pausing, calculating, shifting chalk colors. The most haunting part, the room's silence. There was no chaos, no confusion, just awe. The caption read, "Black student solves unsolvable problem at elite prep school. Teacher accuses him of cheating." Within hours, TikTok picked it up. Then Twitter. Then Reddit. Hashtags exploded. "Let Micah speak." "Black math genius."
Ashcroft bias.
By 6 a.m., the video had crossed 2 million views. By 8 a.m., it had reached international audiences. Micah, sitting at the breakfast table in a hoodie and slippers, stared at the trending topics in disbelief. His fingers hovered above his phone screen, numb. He hadn't spoken. Not publicly. Not yet. "You need to say something," Nia urged, watching the chaos unfold. "People are already fighting your battle, but they don't know your truth." Micah didn't move. "If I speak, it gets worse." Nia softened, brushing his curls off his forehead. "Or it gets real." Across the screen, comments flew faster than he could read. "This is what happens when black brilliance threatens white comfort. Reinstate him now.
Where's the apology?
Why isn't this on the news yet?" Micah scrolled, breath shaky, and then just beneath the viral video, a response video appeared. Not from a stranger, it was from Reed Kavanagh. His face filled the screen, clean-shaven, confident, as ever. "Hey everyone," he began. "I was in the room when Micah did that math problem, and yeah, it was impressive. But what none of you know is, it wasn't real." Micah felt the blood drain from his face. Reed continued. "What the video doesn't show is that Micah had a notebook open under the desk. I saw it. Others did too. Maybe he copied it. Maybe someone gave him the answer." The damage was instant. Micah shot to his feet. "That's a lie," he whispered. Nia stared at the phone. "He's covering his ego. He can't handle that you outshined him." Micah's hands clenched. "He's trying to bury me." The school released a statement within an hour. It was short, sterile, and loaded with subtext. We are currently investigating an incident involving allegations of academic dishonesty. We urge the public not to draw conclusions based on incomplete information. The response ignited fury. TikTok creators with millions of followers stitched Micah's video with their own commentary, calling out the racism. Twitter threads exposed Ashcroft's long history of favoritism. Reddit threads dissected the math line by line, confirming the validity of Micah's proof. One tweet read, "Why is it easier for America to believe a white student failed than that a black student succeeded?" Still, Ashcroft doubled down. Emails were sent to parents, warning them not to engage with outside speculation. Teachers were instructed not to discuss ongoing disciplinary matters. Micah, meanwhile, remained officially suspended, isolated, accused, and still without a chance to speak for himself. But then something shifted. A local news anchor from Boston, Jules Harper, a black woman with a reputation for chasing stories others feared, reached out through a direct message. "Micah, we want to hear your side. No pressure, just your truth." Micah stared at the message for an hour before replying. "Okay, but I want the math shown too." That evening, they met in a community center. Micah brought his notebook, worn, bent, pages covered in scribbles. He sat on a metal chair across from Jules, cameras rolling. She didn't open with the scandal. She opened with, "Micah, when did you fall in love with math?" And for the first time, Micah smiled on camera. "My dad used to write formulas on napkins while making dinner. He called them equation stories. He made math feel like poetry." The interview aired that night. Within 24 hours, it was picked up by larger outlets, and then CNN called. Nia answered the phone. Her voice broke when she said, "Yes, he's ready." CNN ran a segment titled, "Silencing Genius," the story of Micah Bell and the bias of excellence. A cultural war broke out online. On one side, supporters, mathematicians, teachers, students of color, parents who had seen the same stories play out. On the other, critics, conspiracy theorists, anonymous accounts spouting, "It's a hoax. He memorized it. Affirmative action fraud." Through it all, Micah remained quiet, calm, until one morning, sitting at the kitchen table, his phone buzzed with a new email. Subject: from Harvard Mathematics. From Dr. Ava Lin. He clicked it open. "Micah, I watched your classroom video. Then I watched it again. You didn't just solve the problem, you reframed it. That's something even tenured professors struggle with. Would you be open to speaking? No pressure, no cameras, just math." Micah read it twice, then a third time. A second email followed an hour later. Also, that last transformation step. "I've never seen it done that way. I'd love to understand how your mind approached it." Micah looked up from the phone, breath caught in his chest. "Harvard," he said softly. They saw the video. Nia looked at him slowly, eyes wide. "What?" "They want to talk." For the first time in days, hope pierced through the storm, not just because Harvard had noticed him, but because they hadn't asked whether he cheated. They asked how he thought. It was the first time someone had seen him not as a threat, but as a mind worth understanding. He whispered, barely audible, "They want me." Nia covered her mouth, tears brimming. "It's happening." But just as that hope flickered, another notification lit up his screen. A new message. Anonymous. No subject. The body simply read, "You're not getting into Harvard, faker. We'll make sure of it." Attached was a document. A doctored image. It showed Micah's proof, but with notations that looked copied from a known textbook. Forged. Someone was already trying to destroy him again. As Micah scrolled down, his eyes froze. The document had a school watermark from Ashcroft's own internal server. Someone from inside the school had sent it. The email from Harvard sat on Micah's phone like a flare in the dark. He read it again and again, half expecting the words to vanish. But they didn't. Each line remained, steady and impossible to ignore. A tenured professor, a black woman at Harvard, had watched his proof and called it legitimate. That evening, when the sun sank and the neighborhood turned amber under streetlights, the phone finally rang. An unfamiliar Cambridge number glowed on the screen. Nia glanced at her son from across the table. "Pick it up," she whispered. Micah swallowed and answered. "Hello, Micah Bell?" The voice was warm, but precise. "Yes, this is Dr. Ava Lin from Harvard University."
His heart lurched. "Hi," he breathed.
I hope this isn't a bad time. No. It's fine. On the other end of the line, Dr. Lin's voice was clear, measured, but carried an undercurrent of excitement. I watched the full classroom video, twice. Then I paused it and went frame by frame through your steps. Micah, your solution wasn't just correct. It was innovative. That last transformation you did. I've never seen it before. Where did you learn that? Micah's throat tightened. My dad taught me. At home. There was a pause. Then your father must be extraordinary. He was a math professor, Micah said quietly. Until he wasn't. Dr. Lin's tone softened. I understand. For a moment, the call felt less like an academic discussion, and more like an understanding passed across miles. Micah, I want to verify your work independently, she continued. And if everything checks out, I'd like to recommend you for Harvard's early college program. You could begin coursework next summer. Micah's mouth went dry. Harvard? Yes. We don't see minds like yours often. And we certainly don't see them nurtured this way. I think you're special, Micah. He blinked hard. Thank you. Do you have your drafts? Yes. All of them. Good. Keep them safe. I'll be in touch. When the call ended, Micah stared at the phone. Nia leaned across the table, eyes shimmering. Harvard, she whispered. Micah, they see you. He exhaled, a shaky laugh breaking through. They really do. But even as he spoke, a knot tightened in his chest. He knew what Ashcroft would do. Every step of his life had taught him. The higher you rise, the harder they try to pull you back down. He was right. The next morning, an email from the school arrived in his inbox. Subject: urgent meeting with the board. It instructed him to appear at the administration building at 10 a.m., accompanied by a guardian. When they arrived, the mood was different, colder, more formal. Dr. Thorne was there, along with 2 school board members Micah had never met before. Their suits were expensive, their expressions carved from stone. Micah, Dr. Thorne began, thank you for coming. We're aware of the media attention surrounding your case. Nia sat straighter. Media attention that your teacher created by publicly humiliating my son. Dr. Thorne's smile was brittle. Mrs. Bell, please. One of the board members, Mr. Kessler, adjusted his tie. This situation has escalated beyond what's appropriate for a school environment. Your son's case is now a distraction to the student body. Micah's eyes narrowed. A distraction? Yes, Kessler said. Students are protesting. Media are camping outside our gates. And your son is communicating with press and outside institutions without authorization. It's disruptive. Nia's voice sharpened. So his excellence is disruptive. But your teacher's bias isn't. Dr. Thorne shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. The second board member, Ms. Caldwell, leaned forward. We're here to give you a choice. Cease all contact with the media immediately. Refrain from public commentary, and we will review your suspension quietly. Continue this path and we will be forced to expel you for violating our code of conduct. Micah stared at them. You're threatening to expel me for telling the truth? Miss Caldwell's smile didn't reach her eyes. We're asking you to cooperate for your own good. College admissions don't look kindly on disciplinary records. He swallowed. And Harvard? Mr. Kessler's gaze sharpened. Harvard is irrelevant. You're still a minor, and while you are enrolled here, we set the terms. Micah's pulse pounded. They weren't even pretending anymore. This wasn't about math. This was about control. Nia's hands trembled on the table. You're trying to bury him like you buried his father. Mrs. Bell. No. Her voice cracked. You destroyed one man's career because he was too good to be ignored. You won't destroy my son's life too. Micah's chest rose and fell. His father's voice echoed in his memory. Never let them own your story. He looked from one board member to the other. I'm not stopping. You can't scare me into silence. Kessler's jaw tightened. Then you're choosing expulsion. Micah didn't answer. When they left the building, Nia's face was pale but fierce. Micah, she said, if you're going to fight them, do it smart. Do it your way. That night, he sat at the kitchen table, his notebook open, drafts spread across the surface. His phone buzzed with messages from reporters, from supporters, from strangers sending him encouragement. He opened Twitter. Let Micah speak was trending again. But now, a new hashtag had emerged. An expel Micah. Anonymous accounts accused him of fraud, of arrogance, of staging the whole thing for fame. Micah stared at the screen. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. He could stay silent, wait for Harvard to verify his work, hope the truth spoke for itself, or he could speak now, before they rewrote his story completely. He thought about the kitchen nights with his father, about Nia's cracked hands, about Harmon's smirk, about Reed's lie, about the boardroom threat. He opened a blank document, began to type. The words came slow at first, then faster, pouring out like a dam breaking. He wrote about the problem, about his father, about Harmon's dare, about the suspension, about the threats. He wrote about the truth of being a black genius in a place that only expected quotas and silence. He didn't ask for pity. He asked for eyes open eyes. When he finished, his hands were trembling. He read it aloud to Nia. Her eyes filled with tears. "It's powerful," she whispered. "It's you." He nodded once. "It's the truth." "Then post it." He hesitated. "If I do, they'll expel me." She met his gaze. "If you don't, they'll erase you." He exhaled. Pressed post. The letter went live at 11:42 p.m. Within minutes, retweets soared. Comments flooded in. Screenshots spread. Micah sat back, the glow of the screen lighting his face. For the first time, he felt not like a victim, but like someone claiming his own story. 3 minutes later, his phone rang. A blocked number. When he answered, a low voice said, "You've just made the biggest mistake of your life." When Micah clicked post, it felt like stepping off a cliff. The letter glowed on his phone screen for a heartbeat, then vanished into the stream of the internet, carried by retweets, shares, reposts, and screenshots beyond his control. He sat there, in the kitchen's dim light, staring at the blue glow, his breath shallow. The first few minutes were quiet. Then his phone buzzed once, twice, 10 times. The numbers on the notifications counter spun upward like a slot machine hitting jackpot. By morning, the letter had over 1 million views. By noon, 5 million. By nightfall, 10 million. Celebrities, actors, authors, professors, athletes quoted his words. "They called my father a fraud. They're trying to do it to me. But math doesn't lie." That line alone had been retweeted nearly 100,000 times. News outlets seized it. Headlines read, "Suspended math prodigy calls out bias in viral letter. Black genius or school scapegoat." Micah Bell speaks. But with the spotlight came the shadows. Within hours, Micah's inbox filled with anonymous threats. Some messages were simple slurs. Others were carefully crafted attempts to scare him off. "We know where you live. You won't make it to college. Take the letter down or face the consequences." He didn't tell Nia about all of them. He couldn't. She was already under enough stress. Still, she sensed it. "Micah," she said one night, finding him hunched over his phone. "You're not sleeping. Show me." He hesitated, then handed her the screen. She read the messages, her face hardening. "Cowards," she muttered. "They always hide behind screens." But the damage wasn't limited to words. 3 days after the letter went viral, Nia came home from the hospital, her badge clipped to her bag. She set the bag down on the kitchen counter and just stood there. "What's wrong?" Micah asked. She didn't look at him. "They let me go," she said softly. Micah froze. "What? Why?" "They said staffing adjustments," she said bitterly. "But we both know why. They don't want a distraction. Not after the story." Micah's chest tightened. "You mean because of me?" Nia forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Because of them. Because of their bias. Don't you dare blame yourself." But he did. Bills began stacking up on the kitchen counter. Utilities, medical, rent. Their landlord, who had once been lenient, suddenly posted a bright yellow pay or vacate notice on their door. Micah stared at it, his stomach twisting. "We're being evicted?" Nia crumpled the notice in her hand. "They're trying to scare us. We'll figure it out." Micah knew she was putting on a brave face. She always had. When his father lost his job, it was Nia who picked up the double shifts, who paid the bills, who kept them afloat. Now, even she was sinking. At school, his name was no longer whispered, but shouted. Protesters gathered at the gates, holding signs, "Let Micah learn and Black brilliance matters." Others came to jeer, accusing him of lying, of seeking fame. Ashcroft remained silent, issuing only vague statements about ongoing investigations. Micah's phone became both lifeline and weapon. On one screen, mathematicians from around the world praised his proof, offering mentorship, invitations, speaking gigs. On the other, trolls threatened him, mocked him, fabricated screenshots of evidence he'd cheated. The pressure built until it felt like static in his ears. One night he sat on the edge of his bed, staring at his father's old satchel. "I didn't think it would get this bad," he whispered. Mia stood in the doorway. "You told the truth. That's never easy, but it's destroying us." "No," she said firmly. "It's exposing them. Don't get it twisted." Her voice cracked on the last word. She stepped into the room and sat beside him. "Your father used to say, if telling the truth costs you everything, at least you'll still have yourself." Micah blinked back tears. "I don't want you to lose everything because of me." Mia wrapped an arm around his shoulders. "Baby, we're not losing. We're shifting. And one day they'll regret underestimating you." He nodded, but his stomach still felt like a knot. The next day, a new article surfaced online, this one accusing Mia of misconduct at the hospital. It was vague, unsubstantiated, but it spread fast. "She's being smeared," Micah muttered, reading the comments. Mia set her jaw. "They can smear me all they want. I know who I am." But the hospital's HR department didn't see it that way. They sent her a letter claiming unprofessional behavior as justification for her termination. The injustice piled higher. By week's end, Micah's friends, few as they were, stopped texting. Some said their parents didn't want them involved. Others just vanished. Even Reed's lie gained traction. Clips of him accusing Micah of cheating were spliced into conspiracy videos. "See?" commenters wrote. "Even his classmate knows." One evening, Micah sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by bills, eviction notices, and his open notebook. His head was in his hands. "I thought if I told the truth, things would get better," he murmured. Mia's voice was gentle but firm. "It's darkest before the dawn, Micah. Remember that." He wanted to believe her. Then, out of nowhere, a new email appeared in his inbox. Subject: invitation. He opened it, expecting another threat. Instead, the message read, "We've been following your story. There is a competition, one that doesn't make headlines, one that tests minds, not resume. Solve our 5 problems and you'll earn more than a medal. Ivy League scouts attend quietly. Interested?" Attached was a digital flyer, black and gold, with a single title, "The Masters Tournament." No location listed, only a time and a date. Micah's heart raced. "Mom," he called. Mia came over, frowning. "What is it?" He showed her the email. She scanned it. "Is this real?" "I don't know."
It could be a trap.
"It could be my chance." Their eyes met. The glow of the screen reflected in both of their faces. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and relentless, covering the street in white. Micah thought of his father, of Harvard, of all the nights at the kitchen table. For the first time in weeks, something like hope flickered in his chest, not because of the prize, but because it meant someone somewhere still believed in his mind. Mia squeezed his shoulder. "Be careful," she whispered. "But don't be afraid." Micah clicked reply to accept, only to see at the bottom of the email a hidden footer that made his blood run cold. Sponsored in part by Ashcroft Preparatory Academy, Micah sat in the back seat of a rideshare, his breath fogging the window as they pulled through a gated entrance in upstate New York. The building ahead looked nothing like what he expected. No banners, no stadium lighting, no roaring crowds, just a cold gray research facility tucked into the trees. The driver glanced at him in the mirror. "You sure this is the place?"
Micah nodded.
"Yeah, thanks." He stepped out, tightening the sleeves of his oversized thrift store coat. The wind cut hard against his face. He clutched his satchel, his dad's old one, and made his way toward the entrance. Inside, the building buzzed with a different kind of electricity. Young men, mostly white, sharply dressed, laughing in polished prep school packs, filled the room with an eerie confidence. Some wore blazers with school crests stitched onto the breast pocket. Others had matching sweatshirts for their private math clubs. Micah stood out instantly, not just because of his skin, or his clothes, or the fact that he was alone, but because he carried no visible fear. A woman at the check-in desk gave him a once-over. Name: Micah Bell. She scanned a list. "Ah, yes." Her tone shifted. "Unaffiliated, no sponsor. Okay, room B17. Good luck." He moved through the building like a ghost passing through worlds not built for him. No one said it, but he could feel it, the way eyes flicked toward him, and then away, like they were trying not to stare too long. In room B17, the competitors sat in assigned seats, each one surrounded by 3 sharpened pencils, a bottle of water, and a pristine white booklet, marked TMT. The Masters Tournament. Round 1. Micah took his seat. There was no warm-up, no welcome speech, just a low chime and the sound of papers flipping open. He didn't touch the water. He didn't look up. He read the first problem, an advanced topology question disguised as a paradox. He smiled. It was difficult, yes, but not impossible. And more importantly, it wasn't unfamiliar. He remembered the time his father had posed a similar structure using coins on a kitchen table. It's not about the surface, his father had said. It's about what you can't see. Micah's pencil hit the paper. Smooth, fast, calculated. The timer ticked down. 60 minutes. 5 problems. Halfway through, the tension in the room changed. Micah's page was already on problem 3. His strokes were deliberate. Each answer built from the last like a spiral tightening into truth. One of the boys next to him, broad-shouldered, confident, with a Princeton pin on his collar, stared openly. Micah ignored him. By the final problem, Micah's hands were covered in graphite. His mind raced with clarity. It was like surfing a wave, and he knew exactly where to place each foot. He finished with 7 minutes left. He double-checked his work, not because he doubted it, but because he knew the judges would. When the buzzer rang, Micah placed his pencil down and sat back, slowly, calmly. The boy next to him whispered, "You done early?" Micah didn't answer. The judges came in, 2 women and 3 men, dressed in sharp academic black. They collected the packets without expression. Micah noticed one of them staring at him, not in admiration, in calculation. Hours passed. The competitors gathered in a large briefing hall for results. A large screen lit up with 5 names. Top 5 finalists. Round 1. Micah Bell, Jonathan Trask, St. Paul's Academy. Elias Monroe, Devin Chen, Horace Mann, Max Albright, Phillips Exeter. The room buzzed. Micah stood at the back, alone. A few heads turned. One competitor muttered under his breath, "Micah." Another scoffed. Never even heard of him. Probably a fluke. Still, he advanced to round 2. The next room had new problems. More visual, more abstract, more brutal. The timer buzzed again. Micah didn't flinch. He moved like a machine, but his brain was anything but mechanical. His mind didn't see numbers. It saw stories, structures, elegance. Problem 2 required constructing a 4-dimensional shape based only on 2-dimensional cross-sections. Micah drew a shape that looked like it was melting, then solved its surface area from within. By the end of the round, the judges watched him, not out of curiosity, but with something like disbelief. Back in the hallway, while the judges deliberated, a few competitors whispered in corners. Jonathan Trask, the top-ranked prep champion from St. Paul's, leaned against a vending machine and said to no one in particular, "No sponsor, no team, no credentials. I smell something fake." Micah overheard it. He didn't react. When the second round results came in, he was still on top. He didn't celebrate. He just waited for the next problem. Then a hand landed on his shoulder. One of the judges, a tall man with steel gray hair and a Yale pin, gave him a tight smile. "Micah Bell," he said. "Yes? Come with me." Micah followed him down a side corridor, past the testing rooms, into a quiet office. Another judge was waiting. She sat behind a desk, arms crossed. "We'd like to ask you a few questions," the man said. Micah remained standing. "About what?" The woman opened a folder. Inside were copies of his answers. "Your work is extraordinary," she said. "Some might say too extraordinary." Micah said nothing. The man continued. "There are patterns in your answer formatting that resemble known solutions. Not identical, but close." Micah's stomach dropped. "Are you accusing me of plagiarism?" "We're asking," the woman said coolly, "if you've had access to these problems before." "I haven't." The man narrowed his eyes. "So you expect us to believe that a 17-year-old, with no formal training, no coaching, no institutional support, just walked in here and outperformed students from the top math academies in the country?" Micah didn't blink. "Yes." Silent. The woman closed the folder. "We'll have to review your scores. In the meantime, you're not to speak to the media. This tournament is private." Micah's jaw tightened. "Why would I speak to the media?" The man raised an eyebrow. "Because people like you tend to get emotional." That line hit like ice water. "People like you." Micah stood. "Am I still in the tournament?" "For now," the woman said. "Pending review." He walked out of the room with every nerve in his body humming. Back in the hallway, competitors watched him like he was radioactive. Whispers followed him. One muttered, "Told you it was a setup." Micah stood by the vending machine, hands in his pockets. The judges didn't see a student. They saw a threat, and yet he had solved the problems. Fair and square. He didn't come here to be liked. He came to be undeniable. As he leaned against the wall, trying to steady his breathing, his phone buzzed again. Unknown number. "They're going to disqualify you, not because of your math, but because of who you are." Micah stared at the message. No name, no context. He looked around the hallway. Was someone watching? Then a second message. "You're not the first, but you might be the one who exposes them." Just then another judge approached, but instead of congratulating him, he pulled Micah aside and said quietly, "We need to talk about where your answers came from." The next morning, Micah sat in the dim cafeteria of the tournament facility, stirring a bowl of oatmeal he couldn't eat. His name had been scrubbed from the leaderboards, not dropped in ranking, removed entirely. He stared at the blank space where his name once stood, the same hollow gut punch that had followed him since his father's blacklisted resignation. He didn't need anyone to say it out loud. He knew exactly what had happened. When the announcement came, it was read in the same dry, professional tone as every other update. Contestant Micah Bell has been disqualified due to a statistical inconsistency between expected performance and submitted answers. No one looked at him. No one asked questions. No one except a judge in a slate gray blazer, whose hand had gripped his shoulder the day before. The man had pulled Micah aside, lowered his voice, and said the words that still rang in his head. "You broke the model, son. That scares them more than anything. Statistical anomaly." That was the phrase. The reason. The polite way of saying you're not supposed to be this good. Micah sat silently, as the remaining competitors were ushered toward the final round. He wasn't allowed to compete. Wasn't even allowed to sit in the observation gallery. He had been erased efficiently, quietly, and with calculated ease. But even erasure leaves fingerprints. That afternoon, a new Reddit thread appeared under the title, "Tournament Results Don't Add Up. Micah Bell Got Played." Attached were high-resolution photos of Micah's scorecards, timestamps and handwritten notes from the judges, leaked by an anonymous insider. The documents showed Micah not only scored the highest overall, but had finished every problem in less than half the allotted time, with zero computational errors. Comment sections exploded. "This is academic racism. Plain and simple. Statistical anomaly. Black kid was too smart." I'd bet half these judges didn't understand his solutions. Micah didn't know who had leaked the documents. But for the first time in days, he felt a crack of light in the cement wall around him. Then came a text. From Dr. Ava Lynn. "I saw what happened. This isn't over. I'm inviting you to Harvard. Bring your drafts. And bring your voice." The invitation wasn't performative. It wasn't PR. It was precise, intentional, and laced with quiet urgency. 2 days later, Micah and Naya stood outside Sever Hall, a red brick cathedral of intellect, in the heart of Harvard Yard. Nia clasped his wrist gently. "Remember, baby, you're not here to prove you're worthy. You're here to remind them why they never were." Micah walked into the lecture hall with nothing but a rolling whiteboard, his notebook and the pages he'd rewritten in the kitchen. Problems from the tournament, resolved from memory. The hall was packed. Not with reporters, not with TikTok reactors, with students. Over 50 Harvard math majors filled the room, notebooks in hand, laptops open. Professors leaned against the walls, silent, curious. Dr. Lynn stood near the back, arms folded, her expression unreadable. Micah took the marker in hand. His hands were shaking. He didn't speak. He didn't thank anyone. He just turned to the board and began. He started with the second problem from the tournament, a nonlinear optimization riddle layered inside a geometry paradox. Within 30 seconds, the room was dead silent. Micah's mind clicked into rhythm. His voice followed, measured, calm. "This problem was never about the variable," he said. "It's about the constraint they forgot to notice." He flipped the board, drawing the hidden axis that had stumped every finalist. Gasps filled the room. He wasn't reciting. He wasn't performing. He was teaching. He moved to the next problem, then the next. Some students scrambled to keep up. Others stopped taking notes entirely and just watched. One professor whispered to another, "This isn't undergrad level. This is doctoral work." A girl in the third row raised her hand. "Can you explain your transition between steps 4 and 5? Micah turned, already halfway through her question. I didn't treat the boundary as fixed. I let it shift. A pause. Then, "Oh my God," she muttered. Dr. Lin stepped forward finally. "Micah," she said gently. "One more?" He nodded, eyes steady. He wrote out the final problem, the one that had earned him the highest score, and his ultimate disqualification. When he reached the last line, he paused, then underlined the answer. Slowly, the room stayed quiet.
Then,
A single pair of hands clapped, then another, then the entire room. 50 Harvard students stood and clapped, not in polite support, but in something closer to reverence. Micah blinked. His heart pounded. He looked to Dr. Lin, whose arms were now unfolded, her eyes soft with something rare, pride without pity. "Micah," she said, "would you stay after for a moment?" He nodded, still stunned. As the students filed out, one girl approached him. "That was real," she said, "like beyond anything I've seen here." Micah smiled. "Thanks." Another student tapped him on the arm. "Dude, your brain is terrifying, in a good way." As the last of the room cleared, Dr. Lin walked up and placed a hand on his shoulder. "I've taught here 12 years. I've never seen anyone dismantle a problem like that. You don't just solve, you reshape." Micah didn't know what to say. "Micah," she continued, "I want to sponsor you, not just for early admission. I want you in the department. I want you published." His breath caught. "Published?" "Yes, and I want you paid." Micah stammered. "I don't even, how is that?" She handed him a business card. "Meet me next week. We'll talk next steps." Micah stared at the card like it might vanish. As he stepped outside into the crisp evening, Nia was waiting just beyond the steps. She didn't ask how it went. She could see it in his eyes. He didn't speak. He just hugged her. Tight. They walked down the steps together. For the first time, Micah felt the burden lift. Not gone, but shifted. He had been believed, seen, not as a headline or threat, but as a mind that mattered. But as they reached the sidewalk, his phone buzzed. A single text. Unknown number. "Enjoy Harvard while you can. Your file's already being flagged." Micah's chest tightened. He opened the message. A photo was attached. It was a screenshot of a database. A school admin portal. His name. A red tag. Academic misconduct. Under review. Micah stared at the screen as another message came through. This time from Ashcroft's superintendent. "We're reopening your case. The media attention has gone too far." Micah hadn't asked to become a symbol. He hadn't wanted his face on banners, or his voice quoted in lectures. All he ever wanted was to do the work, to follow the numbers where they led, to solve the puzzles that whispered to his mind like music. But now, everywhere he turned, his name echoed louder than the math ever had. After the Harvard demonstration, a still frame of Micah mid-proof, hand raised, chalk dust trailing in the air, eyes focused, became an icon. It was reposted across social media, slapped onto digital murals, and printed on protest signs outside schools across the country. On TikTok, creators paired his image with the words. They tried to erase him. He rewrote the board. News trucks camped outside his house for days. Journalists knocked on the door at sunrise. Neighbors peered through blinds. Even Micah's old middle school math teacher, the one who once claimed Micah struggled with abstract thinking, emailed to say always knew he had it in him. Micah didn't respond. Netflix reached out with a film pitch. "We see your story as the next Hidden Figures, but with Gen Z energy," a producer said over Zoom. TED Talk invitations poured in. Ivy League departments offered honorary workshops. A tech billionaire tweeted, "Hire this kid before he builds his own Google." But Micah wanted none of it. Not the lights, not the legacy, not the spectacle. He wanted justice.
real justice.
And justice didn't mean photo ops or viral threads. It meant building something that couldn't be ignored. Something for the kids who would come after him. The ones still being silenced, misjudged, and shoved into remedial classes because their brilliance didn't fit the mold. So when Dr. Lin called him one morning and said, "I've been thinking, what if we built something permanent?" Micah knew exactly what she meant. Together, they launched a nonprofit. Hidden Figures Now, a radical reimagining of gifted education, led by Black mathematicians, centered on underserved communities. It wasn't about charity. It was about unlocking genius, where the world refused to look. They started small. One borrowed classroom in Roxbury, one dry erase board, and a curriculum pulled from Micah's own notebook. Word spread fast. Kids who'd been told they weren't math people showed up hungry. In the first week, 20 students signed up. By the third, over 100. Some had never touched calculus before. Some couldn't afford lunch, let alone a graphing calculator. But when Micah walked in, dusty hoodie and chalk-stained hands, they sat straighter. They saw themselves. He opened the first session not with a lecture, but with a question. Who told you math wasn't yours? Silence. Then slowly, hands raised. A teacher, a parent, a test score, a counselor who said, "Don't aim too high." Micah nodded. They told me that too. Then they watched me solve what they said was impossible. He taught the way his father had, with metaphors, stories, riddles. He turned equations into games, functions into narratives, and slowly, the room changed. Eyes lit up, questions poured out. Self-doubt cracked like old paint. Dr. Lin watched from the back of the room, notebook in hand. "They're not just learning," she whispered to Micah one day. "They're becoming," and word kept spreading. One girl, age 13, from Dorchester submitted an original proof to a national math journal. A shy boy from Mattapan built a math app that got downloaded 3,000 times in its first week. They weren't flukes. They weren't exceptional black kids. They were proof that brilliance isn't rare. Opportunity. News outlets tried to pivot the story again. One reporter asked, "How does it feel to be the face of black math excellence?" Micah replied, "I'm not the face. I'm the door. Look behind me." But not everyone was celebrating. Ashcroft Prep still hadn't cleared his name. His school file remained flagged. Their silence, once defensive, now turned hostile. They issued a statement, distancing themselves from unauthorized student organizations. A veiled jab at hidden figures. And then the twist Micah never saw coming. Late one evening, as Dr. Lin sorted through volunteer applications, she paused. Her eyes narrowed. "Micah," she said. "Come here." He walked over. She held up the screen. Micah's breath caught. Applicant name, Mr. Robert Harmon. Position applied for, volunteer educator. Micah's former calculus teacher. The same man who mocked him, doubted him, suspended him. The man who looked at his genius and saw a threat. There it was. His name, neatly typed, with a short cover letter that read, "I want to help close the very gap I failed to see before. I've learned a lot. I'd like to offer my time if you'll have me." Micah stared at it. His mind buzzed, not with equations, but memory, the smirk, the dare, the humiliation, the phone call summoning him to the principal's office. The way Harmon never once said the word sorry. Dr. Lin said nothing. She waited. Micah leaned back in the chair, arms crossed. "He thinks time served is the same as redemption," he muttered. Dr. Lin glanced at him. "So what do you want to do?" Micah didn't answer right away. His heart pounded. Part of him wanted to delete the application on the spot. Another part, the quieter one, the one his father had cultivated, said, "Watch, think, don't react, lead." He took a deep breath. "Invite him," Micah said. Dr. Lin raised an eyebrow. "Yeah," he said slowly, "but not as a teacher." She nodded. "Got it." Micah stood, the air thick around him. The past was knocking again. The next morning, Mr. Harmon walked through the doors of Hidden Figures, now only to find himself seated at a desk, surrounded by 12 black students, with Micah standing at the front, marker in hand. Micah smiled and said, "Welcome, Mr. Harmon. Let's talk about what it means to learn." Mr. Harmon stepped into the classroom quietly, like a man entering a church he once mocked. He wore a navy blue blazer, the same kind he used to wear at Ashcroft, but his shoulders slumped differently now. Not from age or fatigue, but from the weight of having his pedestal pulled out from under him. Micah stood at the front of the room, marker in hand, his back to the whiteboard, as he addressed the 12 black students, seated in front of him. They weren't just any students. They were part of Hidden Figures Now's newest cohort, kids from Boston public schools, who had tested above their grade level, but had been placed in average-level math classes anyway. Micah called them the overlooked dozen. When Harmon walked in, every student turned. A few narrowed their eyes. One girl whispered, "Is that him?" Micah didn't say anything at first. He finished drawing a number pattern on the board and said calmly, "We'll come back to this sequence in 10 minutes. For now, we have a guest." The room quieted. Mr. Harmon cleared his throat. "Hi. I'm Robert Harmon, former math teacher at Ashcroft." Silence. He scanned the room, but not with the smug detachment he once carried. Now his eyes moved with caution, as if searching for a foothold on unfamiliar ground. I made mistakes, he continued. Big ones. I didn't see the talent in front of me. I let bias, pride, and comfort make me blind. Still, no one moved. Micah finally turned to face him. He was calm, collected, but in his eyes was a weight no apology could erase. You said you wanted to help, Micah said evenly.
Harmon nodded. I've been doing the work. Reading. Listening. I want to be part of this.
A murmur passed through the students. Micah took a long breath. He remembered too clearly the laughter in room 304, the smug dare, the silence when the school turned on him. He remembered the office where Harmon said, "That's not good enough." He remembered being 13 and watching his father pack up his university office after the same kind of scrutiny. A brilliant black man labeled suspicious because his brilliance was too disruptive. But revenge wasn't in Micah's nature. Legacy was. So he offered something else. "I'm not giving you a classroom," Micah said. "You won't be teaching here." Harmon blinked. "Then why am I?" Micah continued. "You'll be shadowing 3 of our educators, all black. You'll assist them in their classrooms across the city, in underfunded schools, with limited supplies and students no one expects to excel. You won't lead. You'll learn. You'll listen. For the next 12 weeks, you'll be the student." Harmon hesitated. "That's a demotion." Micah's gaze didn't waver. "It's accountability." The room was silent again. One student stifled a grin. Another leaned forward, eyes bright. Harmon looked down, then back up. "I thought I could help here. At the top." Micah's voice softened, but stayed firm. "You spent years at the top. Look where that got us." The tension was thick, not angry, but surgical. Micah wasn't just addressing Harmon. He was performing an operation on a larger wound. The kind where systems hide behind good intentions and never admit they were built to keep brilliance out when it wore the wrong skin. Harmon's mouth opened, then closed again. For a long second, he didn't speak. Then, in a voice lower than before, he said, "Do I deserve to learn from them?" That caught Micah off guard. He hadn't expected humility. Not real humility. A quiet shift passed through the students. Micah studied him. Finally, he said, "That's not for me to decide. That's for them." Dr. Lynn appeared in the doorway then, holding a clipboard. "Mr. Harmon," she said, "your first assignment is in Dorchester. Miss April James. 3rd period. Be there at noon." He nodded slowly. "I will." As he turned to leave, Micah called out, "One more thing." Harmon turned. Micah walked up to the board and pointed at the pattern he'd drawn earlier.
What's the next number?
Harmon looked. It's a non-linear Fibonacci variant. You replace the additive pattern with exponential shift. Next number should be... Micah nodded. "Correct." Then he erased it. "But here's the thing," he said. "That number doesn't matter if you ignore who's solving it." Harmon swallowed hard. "I won't ignore them again." Micah watched him go. The students murmured as the door clicked shut behind Harmon. "Yo," one boy said. "You made him your intern?" The class burst into laughter. Micah smiled. He'll learn something. Hopefully. And yet hours later, as Micah sat in the program's small office, sorting through intake forms and lesson plans, something didn't sit right. There was more to Harmon's presence. Something in the timing felt too perfect. The job application, the tone, the hesitance. It wasn't just about redemption. He opened his laptop and pulled up the volunteer intake records. He scrolled to Harmon's application. At the bottom, a field marked referring organization was blank. That was unusual. Most volunteers came through partner programs or university pipelines. Harmon had somehow bypassed the usual channels. Micah flagged it, but before he could follow the trail, Dr. Lynn walked in with a phone in her hand. "You need to hear this," she said, handing it to him. Micah put it to his ear. A voice, smooth, clipped, corporate, came through. "Mr. Bell, this is Vanessa Clark, from the Ashcroft Board of Trustees." His chest tightened. "We're reaching out to let you know that Ashcroft is conducting an internal investigation into past academic bias cases. Mr. Harmon has agreed to provide full cooperation and records. We hope to discuss your file soon." Micah frowned. "Why now?" Her voice paused. Then, because Harmon submitted a report about what really happened. But as Micah hung up, an email popped up on his screen, a forwarded thread from an anonymous source. Attached was Harmon's cooperation report. And at the bottom, in red ink, Micah Bell was never a credible student. His public performance was engineered. There are patterns in his work that raise serious questions. Micah sat at the back of the Hidden Figures Now classroom. After the students had left, the whiteboard still covered in equations. He had not erased Harmon's work from that morning, an exercise Micah had given him to solve alongside the kid. It was unfinished, the chalk marks tentative, the handwriting unsteady. It looked like a man trying to learn how to crawl again. The email with Harmon's cooperation report still glowed on Micah's laptop. Its final line, "Micah Bell was never a credible student," felt like a blade. Micah stared at it, jaw tight, but said nothing. Dr. Lin entered quietly. "You're still here," she said softly. He nodded. "He's still lying. Are you sure?" He turned the screen to her. She read the report, her brows knitting. "Micah," she began, but stopped. "This is complicated." "No," he said flatly. "It's not." She closed the laptop. "Then make it simple. Ask him." Micah exhaled. Tomorrow. The next day after the students left, Harmon lingered by the desk, folding papers that didn't need folding. He had been different all week. Less sure, less polished, as if shedding his old skin. Micah stood at the front of the room, arms crossed. "Mr. Harmon," he said. Harmon looked up. "Yes." Micah walked toward him, slow and steady. "I read your report." Harmon blinked. "You? What?" "You told the Ashcroft board I wasn't credible, that my work was engineered." Harmon's face drained of color. "Why?" Silent. Micah's voice didn't rise. It stayed low, but every syllable was edged. "You come in here shadowing our teachers, telling my students you've learned a lot. But you're still feeding them lies about me behind closed doors. Why?" Harmon's hands tightened on the papers. "It's not that simple." "Yes, it is." Harmon dropped the papers on the desk. His shoulders slumped. "I was pressured," he said quietly. "The board wanted a statement. They hinted my job at Ashcroft. My pension would be on the line if I didn't cooperate." Micah stared. "So you lied." Harmon looked down. "I didn't think you were capable." The words hung heavy in the air. Then Harmon added, almost whispering, "Not because of your mind, because of your skin." It landed like a thunderclap. Even though Micah had known, had felt it his whole life, hearing it spoken, naked, unvarnished, cracked something in the room. Harmon's voice trembled. "I grew up in a world where people like me were always told we were the standard. It's not an excuse, it's poison, and I fed it to you." Micah's chest rose and fell. For a long time, he said nothing. Finally he asked, "Why tell me now?" Harmon's eyes glistened. "Because watching you teach these kids, it's like watching the future, and realizing I almost ruined it." Micah turned to the whiteboard, tracing one of the unfinished equations with his finger. "You didn't ruin it," he said quietly. "You slowed it down." Harmon swallowed. "I'm sorry." Micah faced him. "It's too late for sorry." Harmon nodded, eyes dropping. "Then what do you want from me?" Micah paused. "Truth. Not for me, for them." He gestured toward the empty seats where the kids had been. "They deserve to know why doors are closed before they even touch the handle." Herman's throat bobbed. "I'll tell them." Micah's gaze hardened. "Not just them. Everyone." Harmon blinked. "Everyone? You'll record a statement," Micah said. "You'll tell Ashcroft, the board, the media. You'll tell them what you just told me, that you doubted me because I was black, that the system rewards mediocrity when it's white, and punishes brilliance when it's not." Harmon looked pale. "If I do that, my career..." Micah cut him off. "Your career was built on a lie." The room went silent except for the faint hum of the lights. Finally Harmon nodded. "I'll do it." Micah held his gaze a moment longer, then turned away. "Class is over." A week later, the video went live. Harmon sat at a desk, looking straight into the camera. His voice was steady but heavy. "My name is Robert Harmon. I was a calculus teacher at Ashcroft Preparatory Academy. I accused Micah Bell of dishonesty when he solved a problem no one else could. I want to admit on record that my accusation wasn't rooted in evidence. It was rooted in bias. Not because of his mind, but because of his skin." The confession ricocheted across the internet like a spark in dry brush. Micah didn't watch it live. He was teaching. But when the clip reached him sent by a dozen friends, he watched it once and then turned his phone face down. Something shifted after that. Not just online. In schools. In staff rooms. In policy meetings, Micah's story appeared in teacher trainings, diversity workshops, curriculum reviews, and then, months later, in textbooks. High schoolers across the country opened their math books to find a sidebar titled, Micah Bell, Beyond the Numbers. A small biography describing the moment a student solved an unsolvable problem and changed how schools saw gifted education. It wasn't fame. It was something heavier, stranger. Micah was no longer just a person. He was a case study. One afternoon, Dr. Lin walked into his office with an envelope. "You've been invited," she said. He frowned. "To what?" She handed him the letter. It was from Congress. They wanted him to testify at a hearing on educational bias and equity in gifted programs. Micah stared at it. "Me? You," Dr. Lin said. "They've been following the case. They want to hear your story firsthand." Mia cried when she heard. "Your father would have loved this," she whispered. "You're taking the fight to the heart of the system." Micah felt the weight of it settle on his shoulders. He thought about every kid in his program, about every rejection letter, every raised eyebrow, every whisper of quota. He thought about Harmon's confession. He would go. Not for headlines. For them. 2 weeks later, he arrived at Logan Airport for the flight to D.C. He carried nothing but his father's satchel, a notebook, and a single clean shirt. The terminal buzzed with travelers and rolling suitcases. Security lines snaked past kiosks selling overpriced coffee. Micah stood in line, silent, his mind rehearsing the speech he would give. Not polished, not scripted, but real. When he reached the TSA checkpoint, he handed over his ID. The officer scanned it, then glanced at a screen, frowning. "Step aside, sir." Micah blinked. "Why?" Random security check. 2 other agents appeared. They guided him away from the line, toward a small glass-walled room. Passengers watched as he passed, some curious, some whispering. Inside the room, an agent in a dark uniform set his satchel on a table. "We're going to need to inspect your belongings thoroughly," he said. Micah's pulse hammered. "Is there a problem?" "Just routine." They opened his satchel, pulling out his notebook, his pens, the speech he had written. They flipped through the pages as though equations could be contraband. Micah stood perfectly still, heart racing. He had been through this before. Not here, not like this, but enough times to know the script. Random, routine, unnecessary. He thought of his father, of Harmon's confession, of every kid who would watch this on the news if it went wrong. As an agent reached for his phone, it buzzed with a new message. From an unknown number. It read, "You're not testifying today." The fluorescent lights inside the glass security room buzzed heavier than the tension in Micah's chest. His notebook lay open on the table. Pages of proofs, diagrams, his testimony speech, all treated like contraband. The agents rifled through textbooks as though they were weapons. They flipped through margins, their faces impassive. Outside the glass, travelers crowded near the windows, phones raised, faces curious. His mother's words echoed in his mind. "Be careful. They'll try to break you where you're visible." One agent snapped. "You have something to declare?" Micah's voice was tight. "Just what's in my bag." They searched deeper. They pulled out pens, loose pages, the satchel's lining. One agent held up his speech, scanning lines. "What's this?" Micah took a breath. "My testimony." The agent made no move to return it. He slid it across the table. Micah's heart pounded. He knew how this worked. Step by step, they stripped authority away. Then the real humiliation began. "Sir, step back," the agent said. 2 more agents entered. One snapped handcuffs at his side. Micah stared. "Why are you doing this?" They didn't answer. They clipped cuffs around his wrists. His fingers erupted in shock. He had never been handcuffed before. Not in protests, not at school hearings, not even when the superintendent threatened him. But this was different. In an airport, under fluorescent lights, in front of cameras. The stares outside intensified. The glass walls became screens. His face, stunned, gloved in shock, was projected across waiting areas. "What crime?" he demanded, voice low. "No comment," an agent replied, eyes downcast. They led him out through sliding doors. His satchel, textbook spilling, was carried behind him by security. A photographer caught the moment. Flash. Click. The images traveled faster than his cuffs. News crews snuck into terminal vantage points. A voiceover rippled across broadcasts. National math prodigy handcuffed in airport security purge. He was spoken of like a suspect, not a scholar. No apology. No explanation. They marched him toward an escort van. He passed travelers, who stared as though he'd committed something unspeakable. Micah's chest burned with injustice. This was not part of the plan. This was not in the testimony outline. They shoved him into the vehicle. The door slammed. He watched the terminal vanish behind tinted windows. Inside, 2 agents sat behind him, their silence loud. They watched him. Their hands hovered near, he thought. Restraints. He sat back, his breathing shallow. He thought of his speech, of Dr. Lin's pride, of the students watching him tonight. One agent slid forward. Without turning. Pull your phone up. Let's see your emails. That speech. Everything. Micah's throat tightened. No. The agent's hand dropped. Yes. He opened the phone. Agents stared at his inbox, his messages, and then paused. Why are you going to DC to testify? One agent asked. Voice low. For equity, Micah said. One agent frowned. You expect to speak truth to power. Micah held his gaze. They drove in silence to the tarmac. Outside, the sky was gray. The planes waiting in rows. They marched him out, and up the stairs of a waiting plane. His cuffs still on. Media had followed. Cameras lined up at the windows. They led him down a long corridor, like a prisoner, onto a private jet. Several agents closed in. They looked at his papers, at his notebooks, at his speech. Once aboard, Micah was escorted to a small section at the back. Cuffs removed, but a guard remained within arm's reach. He sat by the window and stared at the runway's lights. As the plane taxied, he closed his eyes once, thinking, they can't undo my voice. When the wheels lifted, cameras twinned like sentinels at the windows. In the air, his phone buzzed. A tweet. Shri Micah. We saw him handcuffed. Then another. This is what fear looks like. Then an SMS from Dr. Lin. I'm live. Students, supporters, Congress. They're awake. He typed back. I'm okay. Speak for me. Outside, the world watched. The jet landed at Reagan National Airport. He was escorted off, cuffs never reapplied. But guard steps close. On the tarmac, amid press and agents, he was escorted toward a side entrance. He passed through doors into the dark corridor toward the Capitol steps. Lights, cameras, reporters. He glanced up. The fall of night framed the steps ahead. On those steps awaited a stage, a podium. He straightened. He knew that moment would be beamed to millions. He thought, they tried to silence me in motion. But I'll speak in full view. As he walked onto the Capitol steps, the crowd's roar surged, and his phone lit with a notification from his father's old university account. I'm here too. Micah stepped up to the podium on the east front steps of the Capitol, its marble columns looming behind him under floodlights, microphones perched expectantly before him, and a hush falling over the sea of cameras, spectators, staffers, and protesters. He adjusted the lapel microphone. His father's old satchel lay on the ground beside him, a quiet anchor to home. His heart hammered, but he stood tall, gathering every fragment of resolve he had ever stored. He looked out at the assembled crowd. Civil rights advocates, students with raised fists, education reform groups, the press, and above all, lawmakers. The windows in the chamber behind him glowed like watchful eyes. He squared his shoulders and exhaled. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, members of Congress, and to every person watching across this nation, he began. His voice cracked at first, then steadied. My name is Micah Bell. I am 17 years old. I come from a family that has known too well what it means to be dismissed. Tonight I am not here to ask for compassion. I am here to demand justice. The audience was silent. He laid out his case. He spoke of the classroom dare, the suspension, the smear campaigns, the viral video, the degrees of pushback. But he didn't linger in victimhood. He used each story as evidence, a path toward policy. He called for increased funding for Black STEM programs, from early elementary through high school, especially in under-resourced districts. He demanded federal grants for after-school math labs, staffed by Black mathematicians and educators, so that children could see reflection in the faces guiding them. Next, he addressed mandatory racial bias training for gifted and honors program placement in public schools, not just one day, but continuous audits and accountability. He urged that school accreditation include equity metrics, who gets into accelerated classes, who is left out, and why. He didn't just demand change. He offered examples. He spoke of hidden figures, Now how within weeks more than 100 black students had enrolled and grown confident in their own abilities. He told the story of a young girl in Dorchester whose first proof was published, a boy from Mattapan, whose math app gained users across 3 states. Those were not exceptions, they were evidence. He paused, letting the weight of the stories settle. Then, in a moment he knew would echo across transcripts and TikTok clips alike, he said, "You taught us one palm, one me too. But in this country, black palm brilliance, suspicion. That must change." There was a beat of silence, a collective breath held across halls, networks and hearts. Then applause broke out in the crowd. First a few claps, then a wave, then a roar, carried by students, activists, and some lawmakers pushing out of seats. A few representatives exchanged glances. Reporters leaned forward, pens ready, cameras whirred. Micah felt a tremor of fear, not for himself but for the weight of what he had asked for. He looked across the line of senators and representatives. He remembered his father's voice in the kitchen, the nights he spent reconstructing proofs in the dark, the teachers who never believed him, and he remembered the stakes, not for him but for every child who had been told they were not math people, whose hands had gone up in class and been ignored, whose potential had been sidelined before it even had a chance. As the clapping settled into murmurs, Micah glanced at the senator seated on the dais, a tall man with graying hair, conservative but with a face that had softened during Micah's speech. The man rose slowly from his chair. The crowd quieted, cameras swiveling. He walked deliberately toward the central microphone. Each step echoed. Micah's breath caught. The senator stood, looked at Micah directly, then addressed the chamber. "Young man," he said, voice strong, "your words challenge us all to rethink not just policy but belief. I intend to introduce a resolution tomorrow to review federal support for underrepresented students in STEM." The reaction was immediate. Cheers, shouts of yes, amen. Finally, the murmurs grew louder, some surprised, some celebratory, some skeptical. Micah's heart pounded. A line of photographers clicked in synchronous rhythm. Spectators craned forward. Staff scribbled notes. The moment crystallized. This wasn't performance. This was power. But as the senator stepped back and the microphones shifted, Micah's phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. He hesitated, but couldn't ignore it. He slipped out the phone and read the message, one that made the applause shrink in his throat. "Unknown number. You just became their liability. Watch your back." He stiffened. The cheers around him suddenly felt fragile. The promise he'd just made on live feed, in front of the whole country, now felt like a target painted on his back. As the senator's resolution was announced, his eyes flicked toward Micah, and in that instant, Micah caught sight of a figure slipping through the crowd toward the steps. Someone he never expected to see. The marble halls of Congress still hummed with the aftershock of Micah's speech when the news broke. The senator who had risen during his testimony had followed through. He had drafted legislation overnight, an unprecedented, sweeping bill aimed at dismantling racial bias in gifted education, mandating funding for STEM programs in underserved communities, and instituting federal audits of admissions and placement. They called it the Bell Act. It was named after a 17-year-old who had been suspended for being too good at math. Within months, the bill had passed. A bipartisan coalition, students, educators, activists, and parents, flooded hearings, signed petitions, and filled inboxes until lawmakers could no longer look away. The Bell Act moved from proposal to law in record time. For Micah, the victory was bittersweet. Policy didn't erase what had happened to his father. It didn't erase the humiliation in Harmon's classroom, but it opened doors for kids who might never even know his name. And that was enough. A year later, he walked back into Ashcroft Preparatory Academy for the first time since his suspension. Not as a student, not as a defendant, as a keynote speaker. The same doors he'd been led through in shame were now held open by staffers. The same hallways that once whispered behind his back were lined with banners announcing the Bell Act celebration. Guest speaker Micah Bell. He paused in the doorway of room 304, Mr. Harmon's old calculus classroom. The smell of chalk and floor polish hit him like a ghost. He remembered his seat near the window, the way light had slanted across the board that day. He remembered the day. But this time the room was different. The desks were full of students, diverse and alert. Teachers lined the back wall. Some of them had once sat silent while he was mocked. Now they stood waiting. Dr. Lin, who had flown in to introduce him, whispered, "This is your moment." Micah stepped forward. The chatter hushed. He began simply. "A year ago I stood in this room and was dared to solve a problem. Not just on the board, in a system. He let that settle. Back then I was the quiet black kid, in the corner. The one no one expected to raise his hand. Today, I'm here because you raised yours. In support, in protest, in legislation. Together we changed something. Students leaned forward. Teachers exchanged glances. Micah told them about Hidden Figures Now. About the hundreds of kids enrolled. The new satellite programs. Opening in Detroit, Atlanta, Oakland. About the teachers learning to unlearn bias. About the research grants and summer math labs that now bore the Bell Axe seal. He didn't sugarcoat it. This law won't fix everything, he said. But it's a start. It's a tool. And tools are only as strong as the hands that wield them. He looked at the row of students in the front. Those hands are yours. A murmur rippled through the room. Then Micah turned to the board. It was the same board. The same spot. The same problem. He uncapped a marker. The air felt electric. Slowly, deliberately, he wrote the problem that had changed his life. The same near impossible proof Harmon had scrawled in chalk, expecting a laugh. But this time, no one laughed. He worked through it, step by step. He didn't rush. He explained. He invited questions. A student asked one. He smiled and walked her through the logic. Another boy whispered, "Oh," as the pattern clicked. When he reached the final step, he didn't circle the solution. He turned to the students and said, "You finish it." Hands shot up. He called on a girl in the third row. She stood, trembling a little, and walked to the board. Micah handed her the marker. She completed the last line. The proof closed like a door finally locking shut. For a moment there was only silence. Then the room erupted. Applause. Cheers. A few students stood. Teachers clapped. The sound rose and rose, filling the space where once there had only been mockery. Micah felt his throat tighten. He stepped back, letting the kids have the board. At the rear of the room, Mr. Harmon stood quietly, not at the front, not in authority, but among the teachers who had come to listen. He clapped too, not perfunctorily, but with something like respect. Micah caught his eye. Harmon nodded once. Micah returned it, small but steady. It wasn't forgiveness. It was acknowledgement. Dr. Len moved to the podium. "Today," she said, "we're not just honoring a law. We're honoring a lesson that brilliance knows no color, but bias still blinds too many eyes." She stepped aside. Micah took the podium once more. He looked at the students, some leaning forward eagerly, some shy but glowing, all of them holding their notebooks like tickets to a new world. He took a breath. "A year ago I was dared to solve a problem. Today I'm daring you." He paused, scanning the room. "I'm daring you to believe that your brilliance is yours, even when they tell you it's not. I'm daring you to take up space, to raise your hands, to finish the proofs they said you couldn't. I'm daring you to change the equation." He glanced at the board behind him, at the girl's handwriting finishing his proof. "They taught us 1.1, E2, he said, voice clear. "But in this country, black brilliance, E's suspicion. That must change. And it's you who will change it." The room stood as one. Teachers, students, staff. Even Harmon. Applause rolled through the halls, down the stairwell, into the courtyard where more students had gathered to watch on a projector. Micah stepped back, heart pounding. He thought of his father, of nights at the kitchen table, of his mother's hands trembling over eviction notices, of every random check and every whispered not credible. He thought of the law now carrying his name, of the hundreds of kids who would never have to fight this fight alone. And then into the microphone, he spoke the last words, not just for himself, but for every child who would ever stand where he had stood. "Brilliance knows no color, but bias still blinds too many eyes. What would you have done in my place?" Comment below, and if this story moved you, like and subscribe to keep these voices alive. The applause swelled into a standing ovation. Students reached for their phones, already posting clips. Outside, news crews beamed the moment live. Across the country, kids in classrooms watched on projectors, whispering his name. Micah didn't bow. He didn't wave. He simply stepped back from the podium, letting the sound wash over him. For the first time since room 3-4, he felt not like a kid, defending his worth, but like a man who had opened a door and held it wide. As the crowd roared, a text buzzed on Micah's phone from an unknown number. It read, "We're not done yet. There's another problem waiting for you. No one should lose their future, just because of the color of their skin." If this story made you feel something, anything, don't let it stop here. Type yes. If you believe in justice, subscribe if this broke your heart.